Hello, I'm Robert Birmelin, and I'm an artist.
Robert Birmelin, who will turn 90 in November, is a major American artist known particularly for his paintings of New York City crowds. In Philadelphia, Bob is represented by the Stanek Gallery, and a number of his works will be on display there starting March 4th. Here's an excerpt from a film I made about a 2018 Stanek Gallery show that included some of his paintings. One of my favorites in the show, Robert Birmelin, has been a fixture in the art world since the 1980s. Critic Donald Cuspit wrote in Art Forum, "Birmelin's paintings are brilliant in the way they confront us with a variety of urban spaces and surfaces, including human surfaces." His is a tough-minded realism. These are not a tourist's pictures. They flatter no one and are full of psychological as well as material detail. Bob was born in 1933 in Newark, New Jersey, and grew up in a German-Irish neighborhood there.
I come from a working class family. It was a modest home, but very loving. My father was a machinist in a shipyard, a very skilled craftsman.
Bob excelled at art in high school under the guidance of Miss Fisher, his revered art teacher. But what next?
I really didn't want to go to work. My father worked hard all his life, and he told me, don't ever work in a factory. So I got the idea of going on as an artist. I had no idea about higher education.
Miss Fisher talked him into applying to Cooper Union.
I studied at Cooper Union in the 1950s and later at Yale during the era of Joseph Albers. Remarkable man, but I had difficulty with him and the general drift of what was being done at the time. And I betook myself to the print room where I started to work on etchings. And they were really the first works I did that I felt were really mine. And they came pretty much out of my mind, my nightmares, my dreams. Once out of school, I was very fortunate. Fulbright to London and later a couple of years at the American Academy in Rome. My wife, Blair, and I traveled through Europe looking at everything that could be looked at. I was fascinated by Caravaggio, Pontormo, Rosso Fiorentino, Altdorfer, Grunewald, by an unimaginable array of art there. And it was there that I started to paint much more seriously. Coming back to the United States, my work was changing, moving between perception and imagination. I started to go up to Maine in the summers with my wife and infant child. Just went out on the beach and I started to paint directly from nature. I'd start from outside, go back to the studio to carry it to a conclusion.
those directly observed paintings of Maine's rocky shore triggered something in Bob's imagination.
I was painting on the beach, working on a large piece, and I decided I would build a city on that beach. I simply would start with a general sense of land, and this was what made it exciting. I was building a city. There were rivers, there were railroads, there were roads. The city grew by brush. It was not directly observed. It's not from photographs. It is out of the lifetime of living in the New York, northern New Jersey area. Many, many bus rides across the Jersey meadows, down the Jersey Turnpike, past the great industrial areas, partially in ruins, and the gas tanks along that stretch of road. Does it look like any specific buildings or any specific area? It looks like it, but it's completely a creature of the mind.
I see you as a quintessential New York City artist.
As a Jersey boy, taking the bus through the Lincoln Tunnel into New York City was a magical tour. It always was for me. When I had my studio in New York from the late 70s on till the advent of COVID, the movement of people in the street, the activity of the city became the central interest of my painting.
Your crowd paintings invite a viewer not just to look at them, but to enter and become part of them. How do you achieve that effect?
I was reading Art and Illusion by Ernst Gombrich, which is a very great book. I began to think about how I was experiencing my surroundings. What was I looking at? People were in motion. How could I begin to suggest the experience of being in and moving through a constantly changing human environment? Thinking about what I focused on and how one's focus moved, what happened at the periphery of my vision as I noticed one thing rather than another, and was trying to find a way to create some kind of equivalent to that perceptual experience of not only seeing the crowd, but being within the crowd. I always thought about where I was standing or moving within the crowds of people I was describing. That I wanted to feel the continuity between my space and the fictive space of the painting. I wasn't interested in detail as such, but I was interested in the flickering of one's attention. It meant that part of the paintings were blurred, part of the paintings were left unfinished, other parts were built up into greater detail. In the complex paintings like The World in the Dreyfus Foundation, which is about 15 feet long, focus moves from one area to another as if one's attention is moving through time. That brought me in the early 90s to creating 4-panel paintings, which were basically of one general event, but with small gaps between the canvases, which were a kind of equivalent almost to beats in time. The images from canvas to canvas were continuous, but not quite, just as moments of noticing are continuous, but what's noticed is not quite continuous. I had life-size figures in them, and that was very important because I wanted my body and the body within the painting to have some kind of correspondence.
You did your first reversible painting in the mid-1960s. How did you come up with that idea?
I saw a show of Magritte's work, and he had one painting in which an image was within another image. And it suggested to me two simultaneous experiences in one canvas. And in the elevator painting done in 1966, I depicted people coming off of an elevator and also in reverse, they are out on the street. It was a painting that I did not follow up on until the 1990s, when I had gone as far as I wanted to go at this time with the city pictures. And also, I had a bypass surgery. When I came out of it, I really started to think about my own past, my family. My wife was a writer. I have always been a rather avid reader, and I was reading a lot of Russian literature. Dostoevsky's story about sort of a rascal, not a nice person. He was aware of his rascality, but he would sleep well, wake up in the morning and feel he was the most wonderful, virtuous man in the world. He was both, as we all are. There's things we've done that are not so marvelous. We've been cruel, as everybody's been cruel, but also you've been good, right? And this man was between those two states. That, together with talking to my sister about my parents, and a very important event that had happened in our lives, and we had near contradictory memories of what that meant. And that led me to thinking about a pictorial structure that contained near opposites, but was balanced in such a way that it was in itself a whole, but carried its restlessness within itself. The restlessness was the continual doubt about what might be true. And that's what took me to the reversible compositions.
This one, called Lolita or Humbert's Desire, is a nod to Vladimir Nabokov, another great Russian novelist. Are there other literary works that have inspired you?
Dylan Thomas, his Adventures in the Skin Trade, there was an image of a warehouse with piles and piles of furniture. And I've never gotten over that room. And I painted it in various ways. Franz Kafka's unfinished novel called America has an image of people watching a parade from a balcony window. I use that window in a lot of works. So much of what triggers your imagination comes from places that are not reasonable. They can't be directly articulated. They rise up from some other place in yourself, though they've been generated by some clue in the outer world.
The human hand, which you draw so beautifully, often appears in your work. How did you become obsessed with hands?
My father, his skill was to mill these gigantic turbines within millimeters. When he came home, and I remember as a kid, I saw his hands, they glittered no matter how much he cleaned them. Tiny, tiny fragments of metal were embedded slightly under the skin. And if anything began my interest in hands, maybe that was the start.
What did you work on after the Reversible series?
Toward the end of the 90s, I guess I became much more attentive to political things. This country, but also internationally. And I started to make some works where the crowds got angrier. There is this whole series I call The Uprising. There was the Occupy Wall Street down here, this agitation in the city, which I participated in a little bit. But all those things were fueling it, together with the general turmoil in the world. And I worked on those from the early 2000s up till 2012. That morphed at a certain point. This was again looking into my past, my father. He worked in a shipyard in Hoboken. I reconstructed a scene of the men leaving a shift, and that turned into a whole series of paintings as well, a couple of them quite large.
Of course, everything changes. Remembering an era past, what forces were in play. The shipyards along the Hudson River, long gone. The skilled workmen who built the ships, long gone. Replaced by luxury condominiums. I understand by 2014, you and your wife Blair began to have health problems. Macular degeneration was robbing you of your sight.
The other very important issue is that my wife was sick. She had cancer, and she struggled with it for 6 years before she died. So I couldn't have the continuity of attention that painting required. As 2019 wore on, my wife got sicker and sicker. She died in March of 2020, which is just when the COVID swept in. I didn't want to go to New York after her death anyway because of the COVID.
So Bob closed his New York studio and moved to a northern New Jersey suburb. For most of the past decade, he has been working on paper. What media do you use for these, I guess you would call them, drawings?
Something in between drawing and painting, usually with ink wash, some acrylic, or some watercolor, that kind of thing.
Tell me about some of these new series.
These come directly from walking on a street out here. It's the suburbs. There are not a lot of people running around that I can look at. I miss them, but I'm trying to pay attention to where I am. I have a whole series on legs in the city. I imagine myself from the view of a beggar, unfortunate, hunched over against a storefront, looking out. My view would be of the legs of the crowd moving by. I try to project myself into that place. The physical contact drawings are just that. They're about physicality. The most intense kind of physical interaction between the sexes. The lost classes. And in the last couple of years, I've done these drawings of finding lost glasses. I'm afraid the connotation of them is painfully obvious, and it has to do with the deterioration of my own vision and the role that glasses symbolize in that. I first did clocks in the 1990s when I reached the age of 60, and I began to think about mortality. I picked up with a theme again in the last few years in paintings and drawings. And at the age of 89, it's sort of inevitable that one thinks about mortality. Often the clocks have been attacked or mutilated. It's a kind of protest against time. What we have here is an art gallery, pictures on the wall, the inevitable security guard, figures both clearly drawn and shadows. This is about time. It's about memory. The pictures are often divided. There's a zone below. It's the zone of private things. It's a zone of secrecy.
You have some landscapes where you see these figures or parts of figures floating in and out. I love them. What do you call those?
I call them capricci. I came across a sketch by an Italian artist that had a hidden image in a landscape. And I decided I would try to do something like that, wanting to create a sense of surprise and also a continual shifting back and forth between one kind of recognition and another. The hidden image of perhaps an animal, a figure, a hand that is part of the landscape but foreign to it at the same time.
Bob, you're a wonderful painter. Printmaker. And draftsman. Which of these ways of working is most important to you?
Everything that I've done is about drawing. Everything. The paintings grow out of the drawings. The prints are drawings. Drawing from nature, drawing from models, drawing on the street, drawing from my head, drawing out of my nightmares, drawing out of my desires, my loves. They said of Hokusai, great Japanese master, that he was an old man, mad about drawing. I don't want to compare myself to Hokusai, but perhaps I too am a little bit mad about drawing. It's not a bad thing. It's been my life.
Special thanks to Bob's son, Nick, and the staff of the Stanek Gallery for giving me photographs, audio, and video files.